20 to 30% of all death certificates are incorrect. That's according to Bob Anderson, Chief of Mortality at the National Center of Health Statistics. So what do you do if you have an incorrect death certificate? Well, I'm Darren Findling of the Probate Pro, and we're going to examine Michigan's application to correct an incorrect death certificate. This form is widely available. I'd be happy to provide it to you free of charge. Of course, you can contact my office at 833-PROBATE or go onto the website and we'd be happy to provide it to you. So let's kind of examine this process of this death certificate having incorrect information. Imagine it fails to list a surviving spouse when there is a surviving spouse. The Social Security number or maybe the date of death are incorrect. This data can be really critical for purposes of applying for certain government benefits, for applying to a pension, opening up a probate estate, life insurance, or simply for your own genealogical information to have accurate reflective information on the death certificate. So who is entitled to make the request of the application for the change? Well, there are only certain people that have standing or the right to make that application. And those include the next of kin to the decedent, and that's for the personal information only. The funeral service licensee, so a funeral home director or cemetery, can correct information also about the personal information on behalf of the family, as well as any administrative errors that were provided by the funeral home for purposes of completing the death certificate. The certifying physician also can correct things like the date and place of death and the medical facts that caused or the manner of death. And then, of course, the medical examiner can do the same. So this form that you're seeing here can be completed by those people. What happens if you're just simply aware of a mistake in a death certificate, but you don't meet those definitions? Well, then no, you don't have the right to ask of the state of Michigan to correct the information. Now, with this application, there's a $50 fee payable to the state of Michigan for the correction. It seems a little bit onerous that you have to actually pay to correct a mistake that may not have been made by you. Of course, they want photo ID of the applicant and then certain proofs like a court order, maybe it's a birth certificate or marriage license to reflect the appropriate nature, because they don't want just simply somebody saying that they were married when they weren't married under a legal basis, especially around change of marital status, which is a common mistake made on death certificates among people who may have been living together yet not married, or not living together but still legally married, and then the informant simply says they've been away from each other for so long, I'm not going to list them as the spouse on the death certificate itself. So much of the information on a death certificate is gathered by one of two sources. The funeral home, which also often compiles the information, and then of course the physician and medical examiner. So it's really critical that that information be done correctly, otherwise you go through this kind of laborious process of changing it. Now, why would information be wrong? Well, as I used that earlier example, we also know that people are mourning, and when this information is being provided, often facts become blurry because they're so overwhelmed with emotion, and it obscures the facts. Now, at the top section here, you can see the applicant information, address, basic information about the person that is making the application for the change. And then it asks whether you want to be notified by email. And then, of course, there is a identity theft concern, because they want a photo of the applicant and making sure that you provide sufficient proof, because of course, if somebody takes that death certificate and changes the information, they could use it for purposes of stealing certain information. So again, top section, pretty intuitive as it relates to it. Now, when the death certificate is changed, it can be amended, it can be corrected or changed, and then the death certificate will actually reflect that there was a change made on it. Now, also, the rules provide that the ancestry information that's on the death certificate, that it can be changed one time by an eligible applicant without documentation being submitted. So again, the ancestry information is again one that is quite common for people to want to correct. So let's move our way through it. Again, we spoke about the eligibility of the applicant. Only certain people are allowed to make this request. And again, the most common reason that we see a next of kin doing it is because of the spousal issue in the relevant provision within the death certificate where it asks for marital status. Often that information is listed incorrect. And here it talks about the required documentation to allow for those changes to occur. So if you're changing, for example, in the marital status from a divorced or never married to widowed, they're going to require a marriage license and the death certificate of the spouse. If you're changing from never married to married, of course they want the marriage license. From widowed to married, they want the marriage license and a document created subsequent to death which indicates that the spouse survived the decedent. If you're changing from divorced to married, of course they want a marriage license and evidence of residence of the decedent spouse over the period of the marriage to the date of death. And the reason this is important is there is another provision within the laws of intestacy that speak about the abandonment of a spouse. So in the event that there is no divorce, but the two are not living together, that can have some implication as to whether the surviving spouse is a surviving spouse under the laws of intestacy within probate. And to correct from the language in the marital status where it says never married, if there is a history of the residence of the decedent since the age of 16 and an official statement that no marriage occurred for each of the state of residence. Again, this becomes complicated because in some states, there are different ways in which you can be legally married, including what we used to call common law marriage, which in many states occurred. There'd be a religious marriage, but not a legal marriage, or people were living together, and that would constitute marriage. So again, the official proof of marriage is quite different than a divorce, where there is an actual court order when the divorce occurs. Now, what happens if you're changing the name? Often we see mistakes around nicknames. Think of Bo Schembechler or Sparky Anderson. These are names that are so commonly identified with the people, but is not their real name. So sometimes we see that many of the official paperwork that the people used during lifetime had a alias or a commonly known as name, but not the official name. So you can also, there may be a basis for changing the name of the decedent, including things like junior or suffixes like the third, as well as short form name or nicknames like Nicholas to Nick, etc. Now we also see with females, often we see the issue about the use of their marital name versus their birth name, and some confusion there. So again, there's process around providing documentation to the state of Michigan if you're trying to change the name of a particular person, and that depending on the circumstances, the state of Michigan is going to require different proof of evidence so that they can analyze whether the request for that change of name is correct. And that can also include residency, because residency is an important factor, again, for things like the basis for establishing probate. It may be a factor to qualify for certain other benefits. Now, this particular section is pretty straightforward. It identifies in the left column what requests are you indicating that are in error on the death certificate and how it should appear within the request within that death certificate if the state of Michigan approves it. As we move further down the document, it provides decedent's information. If any of the death information is unknown, indicate unknown in the appropriate space, because often that's the case. And then, of course, there's a signature of the person requesting and then the date. Now, this document is, with all of our death certificates, they are handled through Vital Records, within the state of Michigan, and you can see there's a URL at the top. It's michigan.gov/vital records. Also, a phone number upon which you can make that request. And then this document with the $50 filing fee goes to the state of Michigan, and then the request is processed. And again, what's really important here is that you complete the information as well as provide all the supporting documentation, because it gets really annoying if you submit it, wait a long period of time, and then they keep coming back asking for additional documentation. At the Probate Pro, we're passionate about everything probate. If you have questions about the application to correct a death certificate or any probate or trust related issue, visit us at theprobatepro.com or call us at 1-833-PROBATE.